let's talk about The Eternal Boundary by Richard L. Baker III, Rich Baker. This is a 1994 adventure for Planescape. I think, was it the first standalone adventure, sort of slim volume adventure for Planescape? I think so. Often considered one of the better standalone adventures compared to stuff like the Diva Spark or A Paladin in Hell or Dead Gods, even for people who are being honest about what's going on in Dead Gods. It's 32 pages. It's a classic folio in that sense. It's 2-column text. It does come with, got a detachable cover. It does come with, and this is worth saying, because this was the case, I think, for all Planescape standalone folios, folio adventures. It comes with a DM screen with the cover art, which is decent cover art. The cover art is by Rob Ruppel, who I don't know from anything else. It's decent. It's not amazing, but it's decent. It is a dust man taking somebody into the mortuary. It's a gatefold. It's a 4-panel gatefold with, therefore, amongst other things, a map of a tavern, which I don't think is super relevant. It's in the scenario, and a map of the area of Sigil, the hive, which is that, and that's player facing. On the inside, it has a map of the 2 dungeon-like areas that may be traversed, plus monster groups and NPC master table. It's weird. These things are basically chrome and fluff, aren't they? When you get these extras, and I don't mean the maps themselves. What I mean is the fact it's a DM screen that you're going to use for this adventure with all the right things in it. Partly because I'm thinking, no, for my DM screen, I still want all the tables and stuff. I still want all the information I have on my DM screen now. I don't really want to switch to something. Of course, you can use it as a very useful, like the Temple of Elemental Evil map booklet handout thing. You could use it like that, and it's pretty. You could also customize it, and I have I think my Planescape box set DM screen, which is second hand, obviously. That's customized. Someone's actually pasted on various tables they want on it I think it's for 2E. They've done it for. But yes, you could do that if you really liked the arts. I don't massively feel a need to do that. I think that's not what I'd pick. And it reminds me of the 5th edition thing with the same, though you don't get them with the book, but where you can get a gatefold. Posh, is it gatefold or is it? I think they're low, aren't they? They're low horizontals. But yeah, 3-panel horizontals, I think they are. Hardboard for each, with art for each of the adventures, at least the earlier adventures, which I have some of. They're pleasant. I used them when I didn't have other stuff. I don't use them now. So yeah, anyway, that is that. Rich Baker is an interesting adventure designer, or designer in general, who I can think of having contributed to many worthwhile things. He contributed to Birthright with Colin McComb. He was, I think his concept, he did, I think SJR5 Rock of Bra, which I've reviewed on this channel, who wrote. He did the concept for the Astromundi cluster, though he didn't write the box set, and he should be known for two of the more tolerable 3rd edition adventures, Forge of Fury and Red Hand of Doom, neither of which I think are amazing necessarily, but which have worthwhile things in them. He also led the project for Princes of the Apocalypse, the 5th edition Temple of Elemental Evil takeover, which and we probably are missing parts of an interesting adventure there, because much like Tomb of Annihilation, it has some decent end dungeons, but the early play was basically ripped apart by Wizards when they went from wanting it to be a 2-volume to a 1-volume. So yeah, interesting designer, some good credits on his record. One thing in general is that his writing, and I'll say this here, his writing is moderately efficient for a 2nd edition book. It's not crazy amazing. I don't mean it's attractive or particularly evocative. It's okay. But I mean it's reasonably efficient most of the time. You know, you have capsules of major NPCs which take up half a column, for instance. That is not a bad result. His dungeons, he'll typically be getting, let's say, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 rooms on a 2-column page, which is still not, it's not crazily efficient. I'll see if I can get a decent focus. They're still often long entries, but again, it's better than a lot of the stuff at the same time. And it's, you know, the stuff he puts in is usually good. There are some issues which I'll mention in a moment. But yeah, this adventure, I guess I'll read the back. It's a Planescape adventure for a party of 4 to 6 characters of 1st to 5th levels inside. It talks more 1 to 3rd, 1 to 3, though it does say you can adapt. Players are introduced to the city of Sigil, the cage as some call it. Inside this crossroads of the plains, a sinister plot unfolds, leading the heroes into the most dangerous and desperate part of town, the ramshackle slum known as the Hive. Do your player characters have what it takes to confront the eternal boundary and pass beyond? So this is a hybrid of an investigation or investigative city adventure and some sort of infiltration and dungeony, combat-y adventures in occupied organised dungeons, basically, like base assault style or infiltration style. And it gives you both time in Sigil. I am told it's meant to be Sigil. We're going with Sigil on this channel. And then it sends you through to the Plane of Fire. And it's organised in 3 main parts. One is the chief kind of initial investigation part, the Hive. Chapter 2 is the Mortuary. Chapter 3 is the Eternal Boundary, which is on a fortress on the Plane of Fire. Now, the basic gimmick is that a non-Sigil faction called the Illuminated, which is trying to take over the town of Plague Mortem, other things, the Gate Town, has come up with a ploy to get agents reliably into factions, and it's used one of its few successful agents previously, one of its few successful kind of infiltrators, at the mortuary where those who die in Sigil are, you know, disposed of according to their last wishes. It's come up with a plot to get certain insane people via a feigned death spell into the mortuary, sent to this fortress on the Plane of Fire where you think they're being cremated, and then they are healed and reprogrammed essentially via thinking they've met usually a good god telling them to go and do a good mission, and they need to go undercover into another faction on the god's behalf. The god, not undercover even, the god really wants them to go and serve this faction until he needs something from them, which obviously sets up sleeper agents who are genuinely convinced that they are serving good, but are in fact on behalf of this guy called the Green Marvent in Plague Mort. This is obviously meant to be something, because Marvent himself isn't in this, and he is not, I don't think he's statted. This is obviously not meant to be the end of such a storyline or plot or whatever. And basically, what it tries to do here is pretty successful on the whole. And it has, you know, Baker understands some of the things that make cities and city adventures interesting. He, at this point, I don't think in the cage, a Guide to Sigil existed, so he won't have seen that. And that is good. I'll be reviewing that in the next few weeks. But he had written a book that was decent, and which understood there needs to be kind of like tensions and dynamics and things you can interact with. Not absolute top tier, but pretty good. And here he gets the idea that there's an investigation that needs to happen in the city. It needs to be heavily social. It needs to emphasize creativity and getting on with people. And it has a multi-clue structure. It's not a 3-clue structure, but it has a multi-clue structure. And it then goes through, well, what will probably be an infiltration mission to then what will probably be either a second infiltration or a base assault, probably ending up in a base assault of some kind. And those are 3 genres within D&D that he does well in this adventure. And there are some issues, but the basic shape of it is pretty solid. So we'll just go through relatively briefly each part. You have an introduction telling you how to prepare for play, things to do about how to introduce people via faction or not via faction. There is an interesting note, because there's some discussion about leveling it, you know, certain NPCs being stronger or whatever. The monsters in the mortuary being stronger if the PCs are high level, and or if they're really trying to do stuff in the mortuary. It makes a point, under no circumstances should a PC party be able to clean out the mortuary room by room. He means a low level PC party. I don't think if you're a 15th level set of PCs, do what you like. But it's interesting, this could run into the criticism of being over-designed or being somewhat quantum ogred. I think you could see people going down that path of like, oh no, no adjustments whatsoever. But here, this is something which, when we adapt material, we do all the time. We say, I like this adventure and I want to run it and I want to put it in the world here, but the players just aren't going to be that level for ages. You could just say, I'll put it there in big, expansive campaigns, which some of us have, that's easy. But if that's not where you're at, you might adapt it down or up. You also might just think some things that don't work very well or aren't designed well to challenge players or to be interesting for players. So we all do it. And Baker is just saying here, this is likely to be your first adventure. If it's not, or if there's a slightly different setup you've got, level like this. And with the mortuary, he's making a point that this is not meant to be. His point with the mortuary is that it's meant to be investigative, and you don't want it to be something that's so overwhelming for PCs they couldn't possibly do it at low levels or into very low mid levels. But you also don't want to encourage players to think what we just do is go and clear out every faction hideout based on it being kind of having been designed slightly generously. You could design it differently and just make it much more realistic to your taste, but we're talking about this adventure, and I think it's a reasonable move. There's a few, there are 5, 6, 7 technically, faction intros, depending on, which could get you involved in stuff, and the agenda of different factions and what they're interested in. There's then a key faction contact of the Bleak Cabal and of, I think, of the Chaos Attacks as well. And then there are 3 Illuminated, which is this kind of other bad guy faction who's doing this scam. Characters, there's a mage who's the key contact doing work in Sigil. There's a priest who's undercover with the Dustmen, who's doing the stuff at the Dustmen for them, and there's a fighter mage who runs the fortress. And there's a non-faction start, which is interesting, by the way, that just the way, and this is it is a criticism, but it's also an observation of basically all 2E adventures. If none of the PCs belong to a faction, assume that they are relaxing in one of Sigil's many taverns when they receive an offer of employment. It just happens. Of course, if it's literally the first thing in a campaign, who cares? Like, it's fine to say to your PCs, by the way, you're offered this job. But rather than saying, you could put it on a rumour table, it could be something where people they know bring it up. In my Planescape campaign, that's how it's come up, is as a rumour. And it shows, I suppose, the way in which both rumour tables, generically, though they exist in a few 2E products, had disappeared, but also just the idea of generally emergent campaign play. The assumption was people bought modules just to tell their players to play. Into the Hive has, it says you're going to keep having to go into the slum area and to get information. And it says there are a bunch of encounters. It says that you can kind of bypass them by doing one thing if you pick up the best lead, but otherwise they're going to go in enough time to encounter everything. And there's also 7 additional minor encounters, like a Harmonium patrol goes past, everyone's really scared, a beggar across the PCs, but then a cut purse sneaks out as the beggar is distracting them and tries to steal from them. There's a reeling drunk tries to start a fight with them. A gang of ruffians tries to shake them down for protection money. These are random encounters. You can have a city table. Baker wrote a city table, albeit a fairly short one, in Rock of Brawl. But here, this is just stuff for each time they enter. And in a sense, there is a procedure there. Each time they enter the Hive, they get accosted in some way because it's a tough part of town. I'm okay with that in a way, but it points to in a sense, a relative decline here, albeit this is a different format to Rock of Brawl. In terms of the procedure, just doesn't matter. Procedure doesn't come up very often when you're wondering how does this happen and what happens. And the DM Fiat card is played strong. Just do something. The encounters that are offered are okay. In terms of, I don't want to go through them in too much detail. What is weak about them is they're a weird mixture sometimes of underwritten and overwritten. Sometimes they're very short, sometimes they're slightly long for what they are. But they're okay. What's interesting? There are two things that are positive about it. One is that it's not 3 clue, but it's 3 clue. You know, there are lots of ways in an investigative adventure to find the information that you want to get to. So it says, oh yeah, go to this, you might find this. These people might point to this. These people might have this information. You also have stuff that will point you, and this is the kind of stuff that could be on an encounter table as well, albeit this sort of event-driven stuff just happens methodology, what it helps with, what it can help with, and I don't use it or particularly like it. Generally, you know, use it to incite, or if you understand things what are going to happen in your timeline. That's not an event-driven adventure. That's just something that happens organically on the timeline. But if you're saying, oh no, if the PCs are struggling, something just happens, and that's a regular. I mean, I don't think that's great. Not for now. But yes. That's not great, but the fact that there are things that can happen, you can meet someone who will eventually go missing. Well, in fact, you see die, and therefore you know they are dead. You can meet people who are collecting the dead, things like that. Factions will, because they think you're interfering in stuff, try to confront you, and you can make friends or not make friends. And it's obviously better to make friends. The social negotiating interaction is superior here generally. I should say there is not much effect. Well, there is literally some interior art. There's a couple of pieces, like interestingly full colour pieces like there. That is the Hive. I think there is maybe 1 or 2 others. Yeah, I think there are 2 others. That's obviously, from what I can tell, part of the mortuary, and that is a genuinely pretty cool fireplane drawing of the fortress of the Eternal Boundary. The internal art is by colour plates by Rick Berry and Ned Dameron and Alan Pollock, who you occasionally see some of those names pop up in other books. Yeah, so these encounters give you lots of ways in, and are highly interactive, highly social. The typical thing is to say, yes, this is what they are like. They want to give information. They want to fight. They're more prone to negotiate. If you're pushing them, they give you this information. And the Shadow Knave starts interfering, and in a couple of instances, one later as well, decides to try to get rid of them. So yeah, there's lots of ways into different parts of the story, lots of organic feeling situations that could come up, that will come up as they investigate. So one, it gives you a texture of the locale. The locale is very neglected here because it's a 32-pager and it's bigger text over 2 columns and it's slightly overwritten, and so you need to go to the city book instead, rather than there being much more of a key. Here there's just a couple of locations. The Black Sail Tavern, particularly, for instance, that is in the next chapter technically. But yes, you're not going to lose your path, even if you're putting these out on more of a map, which you should, I think, and more of a map or a random encounter basis. You're not going to completely miss the plot, unless the players are very poor at it. They're going to find something, and they're going to be encouraged to find it creatively and role-playing. And that is picked up a couple of times, that's to be preferred. The Mortuary is chapter 2, and here is that, well, one, there is a continuing section of more investigation for several pages, going to where the person you're searching for had been staying and has now returned. And if you really push him, you can find out that he's been told by the god Lathander, he was healed of his mental illness, and has been told by the god Lathander to go and serve him in the Doom Guard, the dance. And then the person you saw die also returns, and then there's an attempt on your life by the Shadow Knave, and you may be called by the Bleak Cabal's Factol, I think it is. I think that's who. Yes, Brendan Maul is the Bleak Cabal Factol, isn't he? Things like that. So you have you could also have checked into the mortuary anyway, in which case you're bounced off by the plant of the Illuminated in the mortuary, and that leads to the assassination attempt. And the assassination attempt is organic, though it's technically event driven. He will eventually attack you. The Shadow Knave will. It's akin, I think, to the assassins will be sent if you kill Lareth the Beautiful, because it's just a thing that organically happens as information stems out. You can't hide this. Eventually the bad guys hear about it. You could put in a procedure though, because it either says Tirana tells him or it just happens. So again, possibly having procedures, having ways that you understand as the DM when to trigger it, and that potentially the PCs could avoid. And if the PCs don't avoid, they'll know what happened rather than it being there's a gap in causality, which is frustrating. And players begin, see the threadbare nature of the backdrop at that point. You then have a detailed key of the mortuary, which is actually cool on its own terms as a faction headquarters and major location in Sigil. I am a big fan of this as a concept, and there's lots of good things. There's one criticism is that the information is very erratically laid out over like the 3 paragraphs on each room. A typical example is saying there are 2 dustmen in here, and then in the read loud text mentioning 4 zombies, and then the second bit of order of battle information mentioning zombies that if you've only read the top bit, you won't know about. Because when you're scanning over, you'll sometimes, I read it like that sometimes. I'll be like, oh, who's in this? And that's something where bolding, bullet pointing or whatever, I don't bullet point when I write stuff up, but that kind of stuff can help. But particularly not putting information in separate sections. Whatever it is, even if it's just in completely natural language flow, which is usable for many great adventures, you put it in one place rather than in multiple in the same section. But beyond that, it has details about every room on the map. I will get the map is in here. I don't think there's a copy in there. Yeah, I'm pretty certain there's not a copy in there. You have like the entrance down here with some separate areas. Then you have the downstairs with lots of sub rooms and areas coming off the sides, and then you go up the tower up to the top, including the there's vaults above which can be accessed and have more cool stuff in them. But yeah, the idea that it is a whole place to explore is borne out in the text, that there are regularly things where there's something happening in the room. This chamber is, there's 5 dustmen in the Great Hall guarding stuff. They will host but only 2 are on duty at night. They will host PCs who turn up and help get them to meet someone, or they'll send for help if there is a fight. Or again, let's go a bit further in. In the guard room, there's 6 dustmen on duty here. There aren't any good reasons, so the dustmen will attack unless the PCs come up with a good explanation. And the PCs want to. The PCs do not want to fight their way through a major faction's headquarters. The library is locked and unoccupied at night, but there are 1d6 dustmen there during the day. The small room adjacent to the library is wizard locked and contains the faction's rare volumes. So you're going to need to have some 3rd level PCs if you're going to do that at all, or a scroll that can be used in the right circumstances, or like a magic item or something, or a hireling. But again, you'll be chased out because it's a private area. There's the Factole's office itself. Turns out he's a powerful lich who pretends to be different people. He has lots of monsters there, and but the point is, you're not going in here to to fight everything or clear everything out. We'll talk about what's in it XP wise in a moment, because it's one of the places you can pick up XP, obviously. Is that you're trying to crack the remaining reason, particularly once you've found out that people are coming back from the dead, which is what eventually is suspicious. People go missing, but then what is categorically suspicious is not an increased number of people going missing, but them coming back and joining different factions. Is the idea that something's happening in the mortuary, and if you find it, you can go and stop it or deal with it. And so you get the remaining clues and you go and find it, and you go to the plane of fire. And so you need to sneak around, find information, talk to people, meet people. And it offers at the start of this chapter several ways potentially in as well. Getting into the mortuary, he gives 4 major ways of doing it. Bluffing, getting captured, sneaking in and playing dead. It also mentions the catacombs below. If you're interested in more of this, there obviously is a dungeon of the whole of it designed or redesigned in Planescape Torment. There we go. There's the mortuary. That I think is the front entrance, possibly. Maybe not. I think it is. So yes, you have this detailed environment with dynamic things in each room. And it's not all insanely exciting, but it's fun, it's decent, and the way in which different and it has order of battle information and reaction information and negotiation information in every room. And it gives ways in. So you think this is just competent, this is just solid. And you can't say that about everything. Not everything is amazingly solid, in even back to the first edition era. So the fact it's just well done is good. There is actually a surprising amount. I was looking through and observing to myself that there's not enormous amounts of treasure, and there's not. It will be if you are. I run second edition with gold for XP. It's officially an optional rule, a blue box optional rule in the DMG. But obviously 2E adventures outside of Night Below are not designed for it. And so some of them do surprisingly well because you can see they're designers who know players want treasure, and perhaps you have some roots in gold for XP games. In other cases, there's massive neglect of this. Here, you do find there's some decent treasure, and there's detailed treasure through most rooms. This is the personal cache you can find in the quarters. These are the rare books, and the rare books include, for instance, they're not actually bad ideas. There's lots of stuff that rare books that are worth 100 to 600 GP, plus several tomes of necromantic magic, and several contain spells and potion ingredient lists, for instance. The vaults also contain stuff. This is where Tirana's vault particularly, you'll find out stuff. A letter from Green Marvent to Tirana, connecting them to the Shadow Nave and various other things. And she's got a bunch of treasure. And there's a whole letter about her plan. There's an interesting one. This is again fine as a leveling thing, opening up options to the DM. I don't think, because of the point being made by Baker, I don't mind too much that it's indefinite and on feel. You wouldn't trust every DM to decide, but if the PCs are messing around in the vaults with all the thousands of bodies, all of these are very difficult for first or second level characters, these possible encounters. But if the players insist on snooping around in places of obvious peril, then they deserve what they get. Option 1, 8 ghouls and a ghast, 1d6 skeletons with more skeletons appearing, and Spectrum 1d6 wraiths, but give the party a chance to flee before the undead attack. This is stuff where I don't actually mind this in this indefinicy, or the degree to which it's kind of like, oh well, let the players do what they, let them escape. In a first level adventure where there is some sense of, this is insanely dangerous, give your players a chance to learn the lesson they need to. There's a good example of this in the final chapter as well. But yes, anyway, there's decent treasure. There's probably not enough cash. I haven't done a complete XP budget on it if I was running it straight for gold for XP. But there's probably not enough cash to make it super exciting for the third level characters. But for first level characters, you'd expect that a slight haul, if they're still first level when they get there. One thing is the first chapter has few set obvious concrete XP chances other than combat, and that is an issue, which is about the event-based, story-based second edition style that's so prevalent. But in the second, in the mortuary, you could steal quite a lot of stuff and come out with a level on average. Finally, the Citadel of Fire. I will get the with the cool picture that I've already shown you. I'll get the map up. You can see it's a small fortress, and it has like ballista platforms, and it has various wings, and it has like arrow slits onto the outdoor doors. There's the thing where if you're in contact with the Bleak Cabal's fractal, you can get, I think, Potion of Invisibility and a Potion of Elemental Resistance, which will really help you in the two sections. The invisibility is really for the mortuary, and the other is for the Plane of Fire. You can also, various ways, you can assault the Citadel, you can masquerade as the dead, or you can bluff your way in as helpers of Tirana. There is a point, this is the other thing, masquerade. Hopefully the PCs took the trouble to mark themselves, otherwise the Illuminated will casually toss them into the fire once they arrive at Area 1. If marked, the PCs are taken to Area 16 and placed in cells until revived. If the players haven't investigated thoroughly and come up with a slightly wild plan, they're just going to die. And that might sound savage, but again, there's a learning curve here, and Baker doesn't seem to mind the idea there might be a learning curve, and I'm not against that. There is the thing, you need to be protected against the element. It's an asteroid of black stone surrounded by a 100-yard zone of breathable air, maintained by an enchanted gem. Outside, it's just the elemental plane of fire. So, yes, if you are exposed to that, you're going to die at first or second level. Then the Citadel of Fire itself, it's in some ways, it feels more so than the mortuary, very slightly small. It could benefit from being slightly larger. I mean, I think, is it, how big is it? It's not actually like 12, it's 16 rooms or something. There's a bit of looping. There is actually a bit of looping, which might surprise you in this kind of adventure, and especially at this size. But you do have, a few ways through things, which is not, and technically there's outdoor access too, because there's arrow slits. You'd need to open those up. I'm not sure how much other outdoor access there is. There's arrow slits basically. So yeah, there's technically a bit of outdoor access. You could squeeze in and out of stuff. And some of the platforms are open, so you can crawl across the rock. So yeah, there's ways through and around, but it's quite small. It's it itself should be not much. It depends on your session length. In a full classic long session, for many of us that might be 3 or 4 hours. I often play much shorter than that as well. But in a 3 or 4 hour session, you're likely to get through nearly all of it or all of it in one session. So there's some sense of it's not very big, but that's part of the point. I guess you could say this is probably meant to be a 3 or 4 session adventure based on optimal playtime and playstyle. So there we are. Yeah, and generally it's decent. It again has some of the things, the hobgoblins who are guarding it will do this and this. This is what the servants do. These are places to hide. There's like an empty bedroom. There's the ballista landings, which aren't occupied generally. There's treasure listings. There's also behaviours which are non-combative, depending on your approach. If you're very loud and combative, everyone will know. And there is information later about. There's that cool picture again about activating the alert, but also just if nothing bad's happening, about some of the hobgoblins, some of the cooks, they just think you're recruits because you're wandering around. If you can get past the entry point intact, then you might be able to get into the rest of it. And eventually, particularly, there's 2 things. One, you can find the gem, destroy the gem, and stop this being a pain, because it removes the castle from action. And 2, there's even a portal to, Green Marvent keeps in touch with the Citadel, so use Sigil's portal. And it leads to a dark alleyway in the lower ward, and Marvent and his followers go from Plague Mort to the Citadel, and then use the portal to, in the mortuary, I guess they could, but more to the point, in the lower ward to get there. So there's kind of paths through and stuff. It's a difficult key that I don't think they're expecting you to use, but it is there. There's reactions over what happens if you're found, albeit that's not necessarily perfectly organised, because there's a bit of it in officers' quarters here, and there's a bit of it in the illuminated. Imogen eventually realises it's under attack, and probably that's something which is better front-loaded. There's organisational stuff here, which is not amazingly high quality, and that is common throughout, but is not unusual in 2nd edition in general, or indeed in many 1st edition adventures. What's nice is that the stuff in these 2 dungeon areas is good. And though they're not massive environments, they can and should be opportunities for low-level players in Planescape 2 who haven't played other D&D, perhaps, to learn basic investigation skills and dungeon crawling skills, both in terms of stealth and probably in terms of combat and action there. Now, there's questions about, resource management and stuff is rarely mentioned. The kinds of challenges you'd get, or you should get really, in the classical dungeon are limited because there aren't patrols, generally speaking. They're mentioned occasionally, like there are some good things. If there's noise from here, these people from here come in. Order of battle information is generally solid if disorganised, but other sort of the ticking clock threats don't tend to be there. Resource management doesn't tend to come up, and I guess some of it is less likely to come up because how many rations do you need over the course of this, especially if you're near your home base, and there's some sort of arrangement over you having food or whatever. But yes, I think That's not a big criticism. That's nitpicking. The biggest criticisms are about organisation and occasionally about selection of material. The Black Sail Tavern, for instance, gets a map on the outside. So one of the player-facing ones, I think it's there probably to fill a player-facing fold. It gets this, it gets this description, and it gets that when really you're there to meet Eliath, and there's nothing else that really matters massively. But beyond that, and so basically it'd be nice if you had more information on the hive than you do get. There's organisational things. What you really want is the intro to have a mini guide to the hive that isn't just, oh, most of it's boring and crap, don't worry about it. But instead, here's some locations, and probably rather than, you put it in the first chapter, but put it with an actual encounter table. Some of the dungeon description is confused in terms of order, but is generally solid. It's fun. One thing it does, it does a good Planescape thing of giving low-level players, this is one of the big gimmicks of Planescape to me, low-level players a chance to get out onto the planes. It also matches what many people think is what Planescape should be about, which is mostly in Sigil, it's mostly, or it can be mostly about the factions, and then you go on an adventure as well to do some other stuff. High city adventure, high politics. And though I think that is something that can happen in Planescape and is valuable, it's got a good city environment. The factions have potential. At the same time as that, I think that's almost a criticism that really it's a very limited exploration of the planes, because the real risks of the plane of fire are limited to you unless you get tossed out, and there is a mage who'll command you to jump, so that works, or it might be a cleric, I think, who commands you to jump. So that's good, that's a fun gimmick that could happen. And once you destroy the gem with the air gem, you've got to flee through before you die. But the actual exposure to another plane is pretty limited. I think that much can probably be done better. I think, and I'll review this month as well, hopefully, Well of Worlds. Its intro adventure ends up in Bartor, and though there are some criticisms I'll offer when I review that, it gives a good sense of a much more alien, strange environment. Whereas here, it's mostly just a castle with one minor environmental factor. So that's really a fairly limited criticism, but it is also a material one that if you want to immediately get players into not just visually striking, but conditions-wise striking stuff, you're going to want to pick a different adventure for planar travel. Anyway, that's my thoughts on the Eternal Boundary. If you've read it or run it, what do you think? What are your favourite Planescape adventures? And I will see you next time.